All right, everybody, welcome back to American Sports Broadcasters. We were super excited to see all the views on the Facebook live stream. Totally blew us away. Did not expect that at all. So we're gonna keep doing that. That seemed to work pretty good with the pregame. And right behind us, you can see this 7-7 here that my co-host Brian Kirkerback has written on the board here. So Brian, what does that mean?
This 7-7 brings me great pride to introduce to you. This is the record of the SEC after the first week. That makes me very happy to finally, possibly, we could see the crumble of the SEC this year.
Yes, the SEC was one of the worst teams in the Power Five conference, or one of the worst conferences in the Power Five. Um, but you can also make an argument that they've had some really tough games. Big Ten probably toughest game was Wisconsin, LSU, and the rest of them were your typical confidence building games. ACC had a couple of big ones, and but it had some mixed results.
Yeah.
Pac-12 had an all right start, and I think it's going to be a great year of college football,
I
Brian.
think so. All right, so we're just gonna dive into college football, sort of, give a cover over of what happened this week, and especially the games that we talked about watching.
Right. So this is just going to be a results video. Any news or anything, we're going to talk about that on Friday. Just because we're going to try to keep this video really short and hopefully get a couple more of you guys to watch it and subscribe and all that jazz.
All right, so I think the first game we need to talk about, which was a pretty exciting game, was Oklahoma Houston. I mean, this game had it all. Had a 100-yard field goal taken back. I mean, just crazy game. But this game, surprisingly, it was very balanced between both teams. But I think what it came down to is Houston's offense is just at times unstoppable, and their defense stepped up when they needed to.
I would kind of flip what you just said, and I would say their defense looked like nothing could break it, and they really showed up to play. And then their offense was the side that really stepped up and was able to move the ball down the field.
Yeah, I mean, great game, and I did call that game, by the way. So it was a really great game. So I think now, just moving on to Kansas State Stanford, this is a game that I talked about specifically because of the results of last year, how Kansas State knocked off Stanford. This game, surprisingly, Kansas State outgained Stanford. They had greater time possession. I mean, really, on paper, Kansas State looks like they should have won this game. But really, what came down to is Stanford had better field position the whole game, and Christian McCaffrey, 22 carries, 126 yards, and 2 touchdowns. I mean, he's just a special player.
Right, but the thing to look out for Stanford is, they came out that halftime and they really struggled and didn't put up any points at all in the third quarter. And it was Christian McCaffrey, just he was the one, he was talking to his guys on the sidelines, getting them fired up so they can march down and put the nail in the coffin and wrap up K State.
I think so. I think Stanford, good team, but they got to get some things fixed if they're going to compete with these big teams, for sure. And so one of the big games that we talked about, LSU Wisconsin. This game was it was a crazy game. This game came down to who can capitalize and who was faster off the ball. We talked about while we were watching the game that LSU's D line just seemed to come, slower off the ball when it was hiked. And I mean, Wisconsin commanded the time of possession and outgained LSU by 82 yards. It was just, Wisconsin was just pretty poised.
Yeah, I think the big thing for LSU is they got to trust their quarterback a little more, and he needs to give them reason to trust him a little more. He went 12 for 21, 131 yards, a touchdown, and two interceptions. One of them at the end of halftime, or right close to halftime, so it didn't really factor much into the grand scheme of things. But then that second interception was pretty much the game losing interception. Um, but they had Leonard Fournette. He had a really solid day. 138 yards, no touchdowns though. And he was also a factor in the passing game. But this is just one of those situations where you need to throw the running lanes open a little bit. You can't just hammer away all the time. I mean, as much as I would love to say that you could, not against that Wisconsin defense really came to play, especially T.J. Watt looked pretty good. Heard his name called a lot, and Wisconsin looking like a tougher team than many expected.
Definitely, and I think something to point out. The younger quarterback Houston at Wisconsin, he did throw 2 interceptions, but otherwise he had a solid day. 19 for 31 for 205 yards, and 100 of those yards came from their tight end Fumagalli. I really like this guy, not because of just his last name, but played really good. He's a really strong player for Wisconsin, and definitely going to be a key player for their success this year. So a game that I predicted exactly what was going to happen. The Alabama USC game, as I said, USC definitely showed to us that they were overrated and showed us how preseason rankings can be so deceiving. Alabama absolutely manhandled USC. I mean, they Alabama 465 total yards, USC 194 total yards. I mean, the score was 52-6. USC embarrassed after this game.
Right, and I think Alabama kind of showing once again that they're going to be a tough team to beat. And they have a lot of naysayers pretty much just around the country, and I think they're just wanting to say, we deserve to be given the recognition that we are.
And now that you say that, I'm going to be one of those naysayers. Their quarterback very very strong, but like I said, USC was very overrated in this game, so it's hard to say how really good Alabama is. Now, we thought, early on LSU was going to be great competition for them. Might still down the road. But the thing we got to look at is, LSU's got a lot of things to fix before they can be that competition against Alabama. And the SEC, as we saw, 7-7, they may not be a strong conference, so Alabama may not have to be as strong as years past.
Right, and I think the other thing for LSU is I think they weren't quite as good as they were talked up to be either. We talked about their defensive line looked sluggish, but their linebackers and secondary did do a really good job. Their defense overall looked good. It was just that defensive line couldn't get any penetration, and they just got to find a way to make that offense work if they want to be good.
Definitely. All right. Well, upset by Texas A&M over UCLA. UCLA is a team that people were talking about going to the playoffs, being that special team. And, I didn't quite understand where they were coming from. And I think, I mean, UCLA played great. Both teams played great. But if you look down at it, it came down to field position and turnovers. I mean, A&M seems to have found a quarterback after losing 2 quarterbacks to transfers, one to Oklahoma and one to Houston. But on paper, it looked like A&M should have lost this game. I mean, UCLA had time of possession. UCLA had more total yards. But the thing was, UCLA 3 turnovers, Texas A&M 2. And Texas A&M is going to be a tough team. This came down to overtime.
Right, and all 3 of those turnovers came from interceptions off of Josh Rosen. And except for those, you take away those 3 picks, he had 343 yards and a touchdown, and you'd say, man, what a good job. But those picks will kill you, and they did today, or rather on Saturday.
Yes, they did. But A&M could pull it off in the SEC. I mean, they looked pretty good. Now we look at North Carolina and Georgia. Coming in this game, I thought North Carolina was a special team this year. And not saying that they still aren't, but this was a game that I think they needed just a cornerstone that. But congratulations to Kirby Smart on his first win as a head coach. And I think this is going to be big for the Bulldogs. They might be the real deal this year. Kirby Smart is a very smart guy. And it just looks like North Carolina didn't show up in the fourth quarter. They allowed 10 unanswered points. And I mean, that really lost them the game. And you got to finish games as a team. We talk about it all the time with different teams not being able to finish, but North Carolina couldn't finish this game.
Right, and Georgia's offense really had a day. Their freshman quarterback Jacob Eason, he went 8 for 12 with 131 yards and a touchdown, no interceptions. But really, the player that stood out here today was Nick Chubb. He had 32 carries for 222 yards and 2 touchdowns. That's a 6.9 per carry average, and that is some crazy numbers right there. Definitely watch for him in the Heisman race. Don't know if he's gonna beat McCaffrey out for it or not, but he's looking like he's gonna give him some tough competition.
Definitely. Georgia, another tough team in the SEC. So the game that was the cornerstone of my weekend was the upset for Texas to knock off number 10 Notre Dame. I talked about this. I called this. Texas is a special team this year, and the true freshman Shane Buechele showed why he got that starting spot. I I mean, Texas ran this hurry up tempo offense that we haven't seen Texas run it ever. And I mean, this was just great. They're using the dual quarterback system perfectly, bringing Tyron Swoops in times when they need to power run. Texas showed that they're willing to run this year. That yeah, they threw some deep bombs and they worked, and sometimes they didn't, but the run was always there. Now, Texas defense came out pretty strong, but then in the the fourth quarter, they allowed 17 unanswered points, let their lead evaporate into thin air. And this really started to scare me. I thought that it was going to be just another train wreck season. And this game even involved Texas was going to go up by 3, and they get their extra point blocked and ran all the way back.
Returned for 2 more points.
And ties the game. It went to second overtime, but all it came down to is the defense stepped up when they needed to, and Tyrone Swoops came in and just power run that ball. They could not stop Swoops.
Right, and I think I would agree with what a lot of people said, that Texas is probably one of the most improved teams in college football. I'm no Texas fan by any sort of the word, but objectively, you have to like the kind of offense that they're running, using Tyrone Swoops as a 250-pound, basically running a wildcat with him, and then Shane Buechele having some vertical threat. And he had a pretty good opening day, 280 yards, 2 touchdowns, and 1 pick. But the Notre Dame defense, they're looking, or not defense, just the team overall is looking pretty solid. They put up 47 points. They're going to be another team. They lost a tough game at Texas, and I think that crowd really helped Texas out. I think that if this game is played at Notre Dame, I think it's a very different story. But really, I think 2 teams that are very good played each other, and unfortunately, I came out on the losing end of this pick. But I think they're going to be 2 teams that are going to be fun to watch all year long.
Yeah, and I think one more thing to point out about Notre Dame. They started the game with a 2 quarterback system as well, but then Kaiser took over the game, and I mean he played spectacular. Definitely good quarterback. And the thing that possibly could change the game, there was a time in the game where Torrey Hunter Jr. was absolutely got his bell rung.
Oh yeah.
In a pot, some people are saying should have been called targeting, others are not. The ACC came out after reviewing it saying it should have been. The Big 12, on the other hand, who officiated the game, and after the league looked or the conference looked at it, still said there shouldn't have been targeting, which is a very controversial call, which we will touch on later this week.
We're going to try to stay out of that too much in this video.
Definitely. But, Notre Dame looks solid. And, Texas proved a lot to people because in the AP, they went from unranked to 11, even getting votes to be as high as second in the AP polls. So hopefully they can keep it going, and it's not just a one-hit wonder.
Okay. Let's see here. I guess next game we're going to cover is Ole Miss and FSU. Florida State went ahead and won this game 45-34, but they were down at halftime. I believe it was 28-13 or 14, something like that. And really, it should have been 28-24 because the wide receiver caught a deep pass, had just open running lanes, free touchdown, and he drops the football, and it just for no reason, it rolls out of bounds. They end up having to settle for a field goal before halftime, and it looked like that was going to really hurt them, but they managed to come back. They played off some Ole Miss mistakes. They forced a bunch of turnovers, and really that was what did it for him. Chad Kelly, he had a pretty good day except for these 3 interceptions that he had. 21-39, 313 yards, but those 3 picks really came back to haunt him as Florida State scored 13 points off of turnovers. At one point, they had scored 30 unanswered points. And, part of the reason for it is Chad Kelly was under fire all night long. Let's see, DeMarcus Walker had 4.5 sacks and a forced fumble on one of those. And he's the guy that vowed to get 20. So he showed up today. And, one interesting stat I'd like to point out about Florida State is that since 2 years ago, since 2014, when they've been trailing at halftime, they are undefeated.
Yeah, and I mean, I think a lot of, as we know, I love the quarterbacks. And I mean, Florida State's Francis, he played amazing. 33 for 52, 419 yards, two touchdowns. But I mean, he really commanded this team. And, and the thing is, I mean, he's reminding me a lot of how he commands a team as how Jameis Winston did when he won the Heisman. And I think, I think they're going to be very successful because they have a very dynamic team. The only thing is they cannot always expect to be down, all these points and come back and score 33 unanswered points. It's just not going to happen. So they definitely got to get that first half under control.
Well, I think with that first half, I think a lot of it was just the freshman coming in, and he wasn't guaranteed to be the starter. They had the senior backing him up, but just coming out, and I think he had a little jitters. I think he was just, it wasn't, it was all a brand new experience for him. Never played in front of this many people, and it was really just right down the street from where he grew up. Big game for him. Really showed up in the second half.
Definitely. I mean, both are good teams, but I think this is a disappointment for Ole Miss. I mean, not to take away, Florida State is a good team, but once again, Ole Miss, just like other teams this week, as we saw, cannot finish a game. I mean, the turnovers were deadly, but they had to come out and prove that they were better than last year, and I don't know if they did.
I don't know that they did either.
So I think the next game we need to cover is Nebraska Fresno State.
Uh, Well, I guess we can go to them. Okay. Well, Brian here was a moron, and he chose Fresno State. Nebraska wins it 43 to 10. Really, the thing to look at, Tommy Armstrong only had 10 passing attempts, and he completed five for 108 yards and touchdown, no interceptions. Which how do you get Tommy Armstrong to not throw interceptions? You have him only throw the ball
Yeah.
five or 10 times. Um, as a team, they ran for 292 yards, which is crazy. And I love it, I really do, but I don't expect to see it as much going forward. Look for it again when they play Wyoming, but I mean, you just can't always keep those kind of numbers up. Now, if you go against a good run defense, you're going to have to air it out, and I think they are going to probably try to throw the football a little bit against Wyoming, loosen up Tommy's arm, and because this the running attack is great, but a lot of times it doesn't have the big plays that you sometimes need to win a game. So look for them to try to get some of those this upcoming game.
Definitely. Yes, I did pick Fresno State, and at halftime it looked like I was spot on, but they came out that second half and they really played. And normally we're used to seeing a Nebraska team that plays hard in the first half and can't finish the game, but they started to change that script. But the biggest takeaway from this game for me was the tribute to Sam Foltz taking a delay game, lining up all 11 players and not having a punter there. This brought tears and cheers by fans of any team in college football. The Fresno State quarterback declined the penalty and basically said, if we can't do that, why are we even in college? Teaching his team a very good life lesson, even though they lost the game. This was one of the classiest moves in college football that I've seen. Hats off to Nebraska and Mike Riley as a squad. As you said, I agree totally with you. Tommy Armstrong learned to make those better decisions. Yeah, he didn't throw a lot, so it's hard to say if he's fully there yet, but he made better decisions this game. And I do have to agree with you again. Running the ball, it's so dynamic for Nebraska, and it's something the Nebraska fans have wanted to see ever since Tom Osborne left. They want to see that pound run, running downfield and just going. Um, another takeaway from this game is, we wanted to see, did Nebraska learn from last year? And on the offense, I think they did. On defense, not so much. The defensive line did very well, I thought, that game, but the secondary is still weak. That's what allowed Fresno to stay close in the first half, simply that they were hitting the flats and the quarterback felt comfortable, but then he got hit a couple times in the second half and it really shook him up.
Right, I would say that the flats are, in particular, are a point of weakness. I don't know why they didn't attack them all game long. They kept trying to run it, and the defensive line showed that they are still really good this year. We didn't know if that would be the case, but it is. They are really good. And the other unit I want to really point out is the offensive line. They did a heck of a job. They got great lateral movement on their zones. And it was just, as a former offensive lineman, it was just a pleasure to watch those big hogs up front.
Yeah, and like we said, we'll revisit this later. But by the way, the 2 targeting calls were the worst calls I've seen made this first week in college football. But we won't get too much into that because this video will drag on and on and on.
Okay. I guess the last game that I have on here, we didn't really cover it pregame, but number 2 Clemson almost lost to Auburn. Um, you know, really what it came down to was towards the end of the game, Clemson went for it on a 4th and 4, didn't get it. Couple of Hail Marys later and a couple of really close Hail Marys later, Clemson does manage to pull off a 19-13 win over Auburn.
Yeah, and and this was the question coming in, at least for me, was was Clemson going to rebound and be that same kind of team? I mean, I think Watson played a great game, 19 for 34, 248 yards, 1 touchdown, and he did have an interception. Basically, pretty even, except Clemson just had more total yards and 1 less turnover, and that's really what it came down to. Auburn, I think, is a team, they're still sort of rebuilding. They're trying to find that niche for themselves. Definitely could have had this game, no doubt about it. But Clemson was just able to overpower them just enough to pull out that slim lead.
Right, and one thing I do want to point out here is Clemson they had a ton of yards. I think it was pretty close to 400, and Auburn held them to 19 points, and not many teams in college football, at least last year, were able to hold Clemson to a number that low. So props to Auburn defense. It looks like they're going to be the ones carrying this team this year. And I think Clemson actually is the one that really needs to regroup after this. If they want to stay in that number 2 spot, they're going to have to really fight for it and win a couple big games.
I would have to agree with you. So yeah, I mean, big thing, we both went 4-3 this week. Did pretty well.
Yep, not bad for week 1. Especially not necessarily knowing kind of how the teams are looking this year. So, we can do better. We will do better. That is a promise. And I don't know. I think it was pretty solid though.
Yeah. So I think we need to talk about the first NFL game coming up here on Thursday. So, Kenyon.
Right. So the reason we're covering this now is just because we're not going to record our next video until Friday to watch this Thursday game. And it is a rematch of the Super Bowl. Carolina Panthers are playing the Denver Broncos. And one interesting thing, it's been several decades since the Super Bowl was a rematch for week 1. And also in Major League Baseball, it had been several decades since the opening game was a rematch of the World Series, which it was this year. So very interesting the way that worked out. But this time around, I think I'm going to have to go with Carolina. I picked Carolina for the Super Bowl. It didn't go out my way. But I think Carolina this time, I think they're going to be angry. I think they're going to want that victory. And I think the Denver offense is going to struggle to find an identity early on. They have the weapons, They got a great running back in Monte Ball. I believe they still have Monte Ball. And, Emmanuel Sanders. And really just a great receiving core, great offensive line. I think they are going to be powerful, but I think they aren't going to have the direction and the leadership that Peyton brought to it with their new quarterback, who was a former 7th-round pick last year. And their defense will be good, but look for Carolina to come out on top this time.
I'd have to disagree with you, and obviously I do that a lot. Denver won it last time, and I give it to them again for one reason only. Defense wins games. Their offense may struggle a little bit, but if that defense can disrupt Cam Newton and sort of mess with Carolina's psyche and get, maybe a turnover here, turnover there, they win the turnover battle, really disrupt Cam Newton. I think he'll have some flashbacks of the Super Bowl during that game and have a little trouble. So I give this to Denver for their defense, nothing else. That is the reason they will win this game.
Okay, well, kept it right around 25 minutes this time. We're going to probably, the next video might be a little bit longer as we cover some extra news with Tim Tebow trades and injury updates in the NFL. And I guess that'll do it for us today. Thanks for watching. Make sure to subscribe. And what were you gonna say, Brian?
Yeah, and then just watch out for more live stream videos on the Facebook page. Like the Facebook page, subscribe, like the videos, comment on the videos. The more input we get and the more views we get, the better stuff we're able to do.
And everything that you do really helps out the channel. Even if you don't feel like you're doing much just by hitting a like button, it really does help. So be sure to do that. And thanks for watching.